anyways, we're here. Hopefully everybody's safe somewhere. And what else? Oh yeah, one thing I want to show you is the syllabus. Why don't we take a look at that real quick? Because we're moving on through, folks. You know, we're kind of hitting that 1/3 part of the semester. I know that might sound crazy, but how long is a semester? 15 weeks, 16 if you include final exams, right? So we're week 5 right now. So we're really getting in there. Um, and as a result, we're going to start reading this book, Ramayana. If you don't have a copy, please get one. It's at the bookstore, so you can just go to the bookstore and get one. And then we'll have an exam. So we're going to read Ramayana. As you can see, it's a little more reading, right? So the reading for today was really short. It was only 12 pages, but it was like maybe kind of difficult 12 pages. You know, it's more analytical, more philosophical. This is a storybook, right? So it will be more reading, but it'll be easier reading. So hopefully you enjoy it. I know that might be asking too much of you, but my hope is you enjoy it, and then we can discuss it in class. As you can see, we're going to start with the first 30 pages on Thursday, and then we got to truck through it, right? Because it's a 150-page book. I want to get through it in about 2 weeks, and then we'll have an exam. So just to kind of give you a heads up, the exam will be in class, during class, I should say. We're remote, so those who are registered to come in, please come in. If that's impossible, of course, we'll figure it out. But I would like people to be in here if it's possible and, they're able and healthy and all that sort of thing. Please bring something you can type on, right? Keyboard with an iPad or just a laptop or whatever you got. And again, if that's impossible, also just let me know and we'll figure something out. So, and of course, if you are fully remote, registered fully remote, then take it from home. The exam will be on Moodle, and I'm going to put this all into writing, and I'll send you a review sheet probably over this weekend because we're still pretty far ahead of the game, and then you can start studying next week. But yeah, we'll take the exam over Moodle. It'll be timed, so it'll be open note, it'll be open book. But if you spend the whole time looking things up, then you're going to run out of time. It'll mostly be short answer questions. So there'll be 2 parts. One is quotation IDs. So basically, who is Rama talking to in this situation, or what's happening in the book, and it'll be something I would argue is pretty obvious, or it could be some conversation between like the wealthy butcher and Tevye the dairyman, and they confuse the daughter for a cow, right? It's like you either know that is a joke from Tevye the dairyman or it's not. So basically, have you been coming to class? Have you been paying attention? Have you been taking notes? Do you remember things that we covered in class? That sort of thing will be on the exam. And then the second part will be short answers, where I'll give you more analytical questions, sort of like what we talk about in class or what we write about in the forum posts, and then you'll write a longer response to that. So that's the plan. Again, the exam is still pretty far away, but we'll have 1 full week. We'll have this week, 1 full week, and then the exam. So 2 weeks from this Thursday. Any questions about that? Again, I'll give you a review sheet probably over the weekend. Then you can start reviewing. If you have any questions, we can go over them together in class. And so there's plenty of time to talk, but I just want to bring your attention to what is happening. All right, so if there are no questions, let's keep going. All right, I emailed you all. You wrote forum posts. They were generally quite good. It was a slightly harder task than last time. The first forum post was basically like, pick a song, interpret a scripture. It's basically, did you get what we were talking about with scripture or not? And so that was pretty straightforward. This one was harder, right? There were 2 parts. You had to take the podcast, Sacred and Profane. You had to take Wilkerson. We talked a lot of different parts about Wilkerson. And so the challenge was really to put those together in a meaningful way and answer the question. I think I wrote a slightly grumpy email. I apologize if it was grumpy, where I basically said, hey, look, I asked you guys a question. You got to answer the question, right? So what is the role of religion in the creation of the caste system? it's not an easy question. It's kind of a hard one. You could take it a lot of different directions. It's open-ended, right? And so that's why I posed it to you. And the main thing I wanted to see is, did you engage with the Sacred and Profane podcast, or did you, as well as Wilkerson? So those were the things I asked you to do. Most of you did them. Some of you did them better than others. I already met with one of your classmates about how to write better forum posts, because I wrote argumentation, organization. That's very general. It applies to very specific situations. So come talk to me. That's how you really learn to write, especially with this weird hybrid learning situation. It's the only way you'll get individual attention. And in order to become a better writer, you need individual attention. So send me an email, come to office hours. I'm available twice a week, so I'm around. And I'm happy to give you feedback on your forum posts and give you advice about how to write better. Because in the end, specific things just come down to the individual. And it really comes down to the way you think, right? The way you organize your thoughts. And that, where do you put a period? Where do you put a comma? That sort of thing. It's not really the point, right? The point is like this idea, that idea, that idea. And without having a conversation about it, it's a little harder to see those general trends. So anyway, send me an email. I'm happy to talk about writing, how to be a better writer. Questions about that? Forum posts, all that stuff. Okay, so getting to the subject at hand. This is what we finished last week. Pretty challenging stuff, I'm going to be honest. I'm not an expert of like race relations in the United States, so it's a little bit of a reach for me. I am an expert of Asian religions, though. So this idea of caste is kind of perfect. We live in a time where these are conversations that I think we need to be having, and they're sort of hard to have. Even the very vocabulary, the very idea of talking about race is sort of uncomfortable. And because of that, I think we got to do it more, right? Make it more comfortable. And I think this language of caste is helpful in having these conversations. I'll tell you why. These pillars of caste, right? So this is what Wilkerson's book is about. It's a new book. It just came out in 2020. So this is only the second time I've taught. I taught it in the fall, teaching it now, but it's relatively new. I'm still kind of figuring out how to teach it. And I think it went better this semester than last semester. And so why is that? So she writes these pillars of caste. She talks about how caste systems are made and maintained, which is what I asked you guys to write about. She shows that there are legal and social and religious and many other ways in which caste is made and maintained. And I think it shifts away from this kind of moral story where some people are good, some people are bad, some people are racist, some people are not racist, right? That story it's a real story, right? But it's too extreme, right? There's the racist person who is bad, and we got to get rid of the racist person, and then there are the non-racist people who are good, and we got to celebrate the non-racist people. Whereas with caste, unlike race and racism, caste is clearly created and maintained by individuals, right? We're all part of it, and groups. And this is what has been happening throughout history, right? So it's bringing in history, it's tying the present to history, and it's not really pointing fingers and saying, you're bad because you're racist, and I'm good because I'm not racist. It's basically saying we're all a part of this thing, right? America was founded as a nation that enslaved people, right? And so we're still dealing with the aftermath of that, and we're still figuring out how to kind of move past it. And I think most, non-racist people would agree that that's something we want to do. The question comes down to how, right? And again, I think these pillars of caste kind of help us figure that out. So anyways, that's me just sort of trying to put a cap on what we did last week. Again, I know it was challenging to think about, but I hope you were able to gain from it. Any last thoughts or questions about caste? And of course, this will be on the exam too, right? I'm not necessarily going to ask like, tell me the 4 pillars of caste, because it's open note, open book, but I might ask you to like analyze purity and pollution in the caste system, right? Then you'd have to know what that is. You'd have to be able to talk about it, analyze it. So that kind of it gives you a sense of the sorts of questions I might ask. Questions for me? No? Okay, so here's what I want to do today. Let's see, it's 1:50. We end at 2:50. So we got a whole hour, plenty of time. The aims of life. So I guess first of all, I already said this, but we read Wendy Doniger. Is the test multiple choice or short response? It is short response, Kevin. So yeah, here's another reading from Wendy Doniger. You might remember her. We read some translations from her in the Rig Veda. We read her thing on double vision. Remember double vision, sort of seeing the world from multiple perspectives. I think she's a very sharp thinker, very just kind of an outstanding scholar in the field. And so here we are again, more analytical essay from her, pretty short, but I would argue, kind of challenging. What did you guys think? How was the reading? What did you guys think of the reading? Were you able to get some ideas out of it? Too hard, too easy, too long, too short? Just right? Perfect? Brendan didn't understand it very much. Okay, well, that's one thing I wanted to ask about, because as I was rereading, I was like, yeah, this is pretty hard. There's a lot of Sanskrit words. Even just like the first couple pages, you got the gunas and the sattva and the rajas and the tamas, right? And so a lot of lists are coming out, names of books. And so if you didn't get every detail of this and you feel nervous about it, don't worry. We will go over the main ideas together. And this is something I'll emphasize later, but for the exam, the slides are the key, right? I'm going to tell you what I think is important. And if you don't understand what is on the slides, obviously you can ask a question, or you can go back to the reading and try to figure it out too. So yeah, if you didn't get every detail, don't worry. I think this main conversation though about duty, success, and pleasure, this is the main takeaway. I think this is really valuable. So I want to focus on this. That's what we're going to focus on today. And hopefully by the end of the day today, this will be more clear, because even by itself, this stuff can be pretty confusing. Before we get into it, maybe I'll ask kind of a broad question. So this is about the aims of life. We have Primo Levi. The aims of life are the best defense against death. Now, he's not talking about this Indian stuff. He's a Holocaust survivor. So he's not discussing specifically these aims of life. But maybe we can think, what is he talking about? This is somebody who survived the Holocaust and lived to tell the tale. What does he mean that the aims of life, what does he say again, are the best defense against death? You guys agree with this? How are the aims of life the best defense against death? What's he talking about? Because again, this is someone who faced death, right? It would be very easy to just sort of fall into despair and pass away in a Holocaust setting. I don't know if you guys have seen Life is Beautiful. You guys know that movie? Italian film. Anyways, but these are grim circumstances that he lived through. And he is telling us, right, how he lived through them in a way. He's saying the aims of life are the best defense against death. What's he talking about? Chat, I'm going to need your help. It's just me and Brendan. And he's a good sport for talking to me. He doesn't want to answer. He doesn't want to answer every question. All right, so chat, where are you at? I'm not above cold calling. I'm going to cold call you all. Do I have to cold call you? Anthony, you're usually up for a conversation. You around today? There's Anthony. Hey, he's already typing. I knew it. I knew it. All right. It's that in order to keep going in life, you have to have some type of purpose. Yeah, some type of purpose, living motivation. Yeah, that's exactly right. So he's basically saying, what keeps you going is some kind of purpose, right? Some kind of motivation, something that gets you out of bed in the morning, right? Do you guys ever think about this? Do you ever think about the purpose of life, the aims of life? What gets you? Ooh, now we got a lot of things. Good. You just had to get the wheel moving. So encourage goal creation. I like that. If you don't have certain things to aim for, then it's easy to feel lost. Yeah. So what are your aims of life, guys? Do you think about this? What What gets you out of bed in the morning? Particularly, you know, to class and that sort of thing, but you know, during the pandemic, just in general, right? So what are your aims of life? Alarm? Ha ha ha. But why do you set the alarm, Frank? That's the real question. Why do you set the alarm? Or who sets the alarm? Nighttime Frank? Does morning Frank resent nighttime Frank? Okay, Kevin says degree. Why do you want a degree, Kevin? I'm going to ask my classic annoying questions to get more specific. To better myself for my future. Ooh, I like that. To improve oneself, to better oneself. Because why not? Because you know it guards us against death, Kevin. You know we need more specific things like this. I don't want to work in Chipotle for the rest of my life. Ew, yeah, that's right. Either my dad is bugging me to do something, but my car is what I get up for. I love driving. Okay, very nice. I feel like you need one in society today. The alarm is annoying, and I need it to shut up. Yes. Well, you know, this is the struggle we're talking about. Is when do you beat the alarm, and when does the alarm beat you? Um, very good. So I'm going to pick out some of these things. So Kevin was talking about jobs, right? Working at Chipotle. I think a lot of you could agree with him there. I like Zamo's thing about driving. I sold my car before I moved to New York, so I don't get to drive anymore. Something I actually really miss. It makes me think maybe I should get the hell out of the city and live in the suburbs or something. But you know, we'll see if that ever happens. So yeah, so those are actually two very different goals. Why don't we start thinking about them? Because we have this three aims of life over here that we got from the reading. What do you guys think? So Kevin's thing about jobs. Let's go for coffee. I can show you some cool cars. Hey, Zama's gonna take me for a ride. All right, sweet. I can pick up some groceries along the way. Very convenient for me. All right, what Zamo's talking to me, so let's stick with Zamo then. So which one would you say is Zamo's motivation here? Where was it? So, oh yeah, his dad is bugging me, so that's one thing, or his car. Those are two things. So, 100% shop right. Here we go. So, his dad bugging him, which one would that be? Would that be duty, success, or pleasure? What do you think, Brendan? Duty, success, or pleasure? Duty, right? Your dad bugs you. He tells you what you got to do. You got to listen to your dad because it's your duty. Exactly. What about driving cars? Probably pleasure, right? He enjoys it. He loves it. It just gives him what he's looking for in life. Yeah, everybody agrees. Pleasure, exactly. And then of course Kevin, maybe you can do the process of elimination, but I would argue is kind of success, right? He's thinking about his job. He's thinking about succeeding, maybe in a monetary sense, but also not just a monetary sense, right? Having sort of status and power in life. Hard deduction there. Ooh, Frank doesn't totally agree. Okay. Duty for certain people. Okay, so pursuit of a job. All right, I'll take it back. I think you guys are right. So pursuit of a job. How could a pursuit of a job be duty? Kevin or Frank or anybody? What do you guys think? Expectations of family, duty to those around you. Uh-huh. So those things can be kind of tied together, right? There's a sense like, I don't know if any of you were told you like had to be a doctor or you had to be a lawyer, or you had to do this or you had to do that, right? But that would be a lot more on the duty side of things, sometimes even at the expense of pleasure, right? Yep, got to be a lawyer. Um, and so I think one thing I love that Frank pointed this out. One thing that it shows is duty and success can sometimes be sort of combined together. Can you guys relate to this? Has that ever happened to you? Where you know what your parents expect you to do, or what even just society expects you to do, is they expect you to succeed, right? Can success and pleasure ever be tied together? It depends. What are you, a snake, lol? Because he's got all the S's. Is that what's going on here? It's because he sees me sign my emails like this. See. Um, so yeah, when are success and pleasure tied together? You usually get pleasure when you're successful. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too, right? A lot of people tie those things together pretty tight, in fact, right? Where the only pleasure that they really know is success, right? I could come up with some stupid song lyrics, but maybe I'll save you guys. Um, where, if people aren't respecting you, if people aren't giving you what you deserve, right, then there is no sense of pleasure. Duty can split to both success and pleasure. So your duty might lead to certain expectations of how to succeed in life, but your duty might also be to do something pleasurable, particularly with your family or have a good relationship or something like that. I can see that. Graduation. You have your dream job and actually like it. Yeah. So Jen is imagining, when these things come together in a really nice way, right? Where you succeed and you like doing what you like. And so then you succeed more. And maybe it's also what's expected of you and you can tie these together really nicely. That'd be a really ideal situation, wouldn't it? It's hard to get that, but it is possible. What if you don't like it? That happens before too. Yeah. So you guys, you see where I'm going with this, right? This is exactly what I want to do today is think about what are these three things and then how do they relate to each other? Then you start over. Welcome to life, Bucko. Oh, looking slow for you, IG. I'm not sure I got that one. Looking slow for you. Okay, looking slow. Um, so, oh, I guess I thought you were talking about Instagram. Now, here are one thing to keep in mind is that these are Sanskrit words, right? So we've got dharma is a very big word. It means a lot of things, but we're going to just call it duty. Slow Instagram, my favorite. Well, there's all kinds of Instagrams out there. I can't say I know them all myself. We're going to translate dharma as duty. And so if you don't want to memorize Sanskrit words, you don't have to. This is a intro class, so I'm not going to make you. You can just memorize these words: duty, success, pleasure, artha. But one thing to keep in mind is that these each mean lots of different stuff. So duty, society, piety, that's kind of one category. Domination, success, profit, that's another category. Desire, sex, pleasure, that's another category. It's all about formatting. Yeah, that's true. Well, it's just it's interpretation, right? That is something I specialize in. It's the study of interpretation, but internet interpretation is hard. So one thing we could talk a lot about is what how are these different? How are these related? That's what we sort of started to do, is see how they're kind of tied up with each other. There are benefits, there are drawbacks to associating one term with the other. Focus. It's hard to have two conversations at once. My mind is sort of being torn by the chat right now. I'm gonna have to ignore you guys, but you can carry on as long as you're getting the. That's really hilarious. All right, so let's talk about it. Duty. It's you guys' duty to listen to me because I'm your teacher. So what is duty? Dharma indicates duty, religion, religious merit, morality, social ritual obligations, the law, justice. Dharma holds the universe together. Dharma, rather than love, is what makes the world go round. Dharma is the way things should be, is the way things are and the way they should be. So one way people interpret this as law, right? Because scientific laws describe the way that things are, right? And then, of course, social laws, political laws, they describe the way that things should be. And so this word dharma, it really encapsulates a lot of stuff. When we call it just duty, we're kind of chopping it off to just one very specific aspect of this word. But in this context, right, in these aims of life, duty is what I want us to focus on. So that's what we're going to focus on. How we're in a class we can enjoy, have a little convo. Yeah, well, so I'm like, I appreciate you guys. So I'm having a good time on this side too. Hybrid classes can be a challenge, but you're making it work. The chat is making me crack up. Here's a serious question. What is the role of duty in the caste system? So we've talked about the caste system, right? The different levels of Indian society. What does this idea of duty have to do with that? Can we make a connection? So here's, as you're thinking about it, here's an image of the Brahmins performing a sacrifice ritual. What does that have to do with duty? Keep the system organized. Okay. Can you say more, Tan? How is it keeping the system organized? Certain caste levels do certain things. Yeah, exactly. So that's one way to organize it. Yeah. And so in some ways, this defines the caste system, right? Because one thing we talked about, I mean, everyone has their own job, so they must do it. Also, you assign your job depending on where you are on the caste. Yeah, exactly. So this is getting to the jobs that people do, right? And it's sort of a circular logic, if you think about it. You know, what is a Brahmin? A Brahmin is a person who does these sacrifice rituals, right? Who does the sacrifice ritual? The Brahmins are the ones who do the sacrifice ritual. And so just like we talked about, these categories are socially constructed. It's not based on any like biological reality or anything like that. So a lot of where they come from is what you do, right? What you do. Hello. Oh yeah, you're good. We had somebody come join us. They heard we were having a good time in here. Um, so if we kind of expand this out, you know, here's a little list that I put together for you based on the reading. So Brahmins are doing the ritual, right? That's their social duty. I think Zamo brought up the question of like people have these different jobs, and it's worth thinking about who gives them these jobs. And if you read the reading very carefully, you would have seen it goes back to like scriptures and that sort of thing. What are they sacrificing? That's a great question, Kevin. It's all sorts of different stuff, right? Maybe we can zoom in and get a better sense in this particular case. A lot of the time it is ghee. Have you heard of what ghee is? You know what ghee is? Brendan, you know what ghee is? Butter, yeah, exactly. So it's like this melted, clarified butter. So that's a big part of it, putting some butter in there. I don't know what they have here. But you can see all the fruit around here, various things that you might be able to add. So it's lots of different ingredients. And I think depending on the ritual, it might even be different stuff. Like I've been doing some research about kind of medically related rituals that are a little bit like this, where certain medical substances are not necessarily sacrificed, but they are put through rituals and then people eat them or do something with them to try to heal themselves. I thought it was animal sacrifice. Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? Because in like Greek culture, it's very common to sacrifice animals, and there are some kind of traces of animal sacrifice, but here it's all vegetarian. And one reason for that, actually, this is a great connection, Kevin. Thank you. Is there's this universal dharma that is non-violent or even anti-violent, is basically saying don't commit violence against other creatures, right? And if we think about the system of Brahmins and the kings and the warriors and so forth, why are the Brahmins above the kings? It's because the kings are violent, right? They're less pure because they get blood on their hands. People in terms of violence against people, is that what you're thinking, Kevin? Or human sacrifice? Violence against people, yeah. So even though, yeah, I don't think there's much on human sacrifice, although it's a tricky subject because usually if people did that sort of thing, they probably didn't want to write about it, you know what I mean? And all we have are sort of writings. There is an example where this is kind of patriarchal, right? Where the men are doing a lot of these rituals. There are examples of women sacrificing themselves particularly on the funeral pyre of their deceased husband. And again, it's a complicated thing to think about because on the one hand, here's somebody literally sacrificing themselves, right? Killing themselves, committing suicide for the sake of their husband, but also for the sake of their duty to society. It's part of a tradition, so maybe we want to respect it. But on the other hand, it's also violent, and violence, you know, self-violence, we could say, but violence nonetheless. So it's a knotty subject, and I don't think we saw much of it in the reading for today, but Doniger talks about it in other places too. In fact, when the British came, they outlawed it, which is also kind of a confusing move. So in any case, yeah, you could imagine a version of this with animals, but since, you know, recent few hundred years, maybe even thousands of years, it's been vegetarian for the most part. And again, the reason for that is maybe you've heard this word ahimsa. Have you heard of ahimsa before? Maybe you've gone to yoga class and you've chanted Om. It's talked about ahimsa. This won't be on the exam, but it's basically this principle of nonviolence. You might think of Gandhi. You guys know who Gandhi is? He's worth knowing about. He was a very nonviolent person, right? What is Gandhi famous for? Do you guys know? Have you guys seen Gandhi, the movie with Ben Kingsley? You've seen it before? Solid. It's really good. If we did, if I taught a whole class on Hinduism, we definitely would watch sections from that. And of course, he's very nonviolent in the movie, right? To the point where it like brings tears to your eyes and warms your heart, and it's kind of unbelievable. And of course, Martin Luther King, I think, let's say, was inspired by Gandhi, right? They lived and acted during a similar time period. Yeah, civil disobedience. So using nonviolent methods to still affect change in the world. There is this value on nonviolence, but it's also important to recognize that India was a violent place, right? It's not to say that there was no violence. There was violence. There'd be wars. Again, these kings and warriors, they were doing what kings and warriors do, right? Setting down laws, punishing people, fighting wars against their enemies. And basically they were able to do that in this kind of nonviolent setting because they were just one part of society, right? It was their job to be violent, whereas the other folks would kind of clean their ritual space for them, so to speak. So this is Dharma. Again, this is a little bit of a review. Maybe you've heard these ideas before, but as we think about how is the caste system made and how is it maintained, a lot of it comes down to these jobs, right? These duties. What sort of jobs are people doing? Another thing to think about are these stages of life, right? Your duty might be different depending on your caste. It might be different depending on your age, right? On your stage of life. So, when I hear you all telling me that you're thinking about these jobs and you're thinking about making some money and you're thinking about making contributions to society, like in the last class, I had a student talking about how she got laid off and how she's feeling like she's not so productive in society anymore. It really breaks my heart because in my mind, and I'm a teacher, so I have a very sort of one-track focused mind, but students should study. You know what I mean? It's like you're only a student for so long in your life. And this is an ideal situation, so not all of us are in ideal situations. But in the old days, right, the ideal situation for the student is to study. There's also an expectation that they remain celibate, right? So why is that? Is because when you have kids, you have more responsibilities, you don't have as much time to study. And of course, when you do have kids, you become a householder, right? So that means you get married, you have kids, care for your family, that becomes your main duty, your main responsibility. Eventually get retired, and so this is probably all pretty familiar. Maybe you have some grandkids, maybe your children start taking care of you, right? You just kind of hang out, give people advice, whatever. Usually people would be staying in the same household, right? You wouldn't be all scattered all over the place like we are now. And then finally, this one's maybe not so familiar, is this preparation for death. So basically thinking about death very seriously, thinking about it in terms of reincarnation, right? That you will come back in your next life and you need to prepare for your next life. And so the way this is described as a renunciate, this person might leave home, go out, live in the woods, try to minimize their desires, minimize their possessions, and basically just get ready to die, right? It's sort of a fascinating part of the scheme. And depending on how old you are, you might have different duties here too. So one thing this shows is that duty is context specific, right? Depending on who you are, where you are, you will have a different duty. So questions about duty? How does that sound? Preparation for death, once your life goal is achieved. Yeah, exactly. Or we could say once your duty is achieved, right? Once you have done what you came to do. And a lot of the time, it just means having a family and taking care of that family. Then you prepare to die, right? You kind of make your way in that direction. And again, these ideas of a student, household, or retiree, that should be pretty familiar. That's kind of how we map our lives out. But I would argue the after work life for people is often a bit confused in this society, right? A lot of people don't know what to do with themselves. You know, often put into a home. And I'm not trying to hate on people who do that, because that is, again, how our society is organized. I'm too busy to take care of my parents. I'm too busy to take care of this or take care of that, right? And then by the time I get old, then, you know, my kids are too busy to take care of me, right? That's, again, what we sort of plan for. You got to plan for your own retirement. You got to have enough money to take care of yourself. But it doesn't have to be that way. You know, that you could imagine a world where people, when they get old, they get taken care of. And then again, when they're getting ready to die, they kind of pick up religious practice and it becomes a more central part of their lives. Yeah, so Kevin says that's normal. I don't know exactly which part he means by saying that, but maybe the becoming more religious when you get older. I think there is something true about that, right? Is that life is just by definition short, right? So you got to start thinking about the next life. Okay, let's keep going. Dharma, here's success. And I'm going to turn this over to you guys in a minute, but I just want to go through these ideas one by one. So Artha, what do we mean when we say success here? It's money, political power, success. It can be translated as a goal or an aim, a gain versus a loss. Money, the meaning of a word, the purpose of something. There was talk about the Artha Shastra, which I was thinking about giving you guys to read, but I thought it would be just too much. I thought this line was cool, though. Makes Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa. Who is Machiavelli? Is that like a Tupac album? You guys know what Tupac is? Tupac was a little before my time, even. So if you don't know Tupac, I won't judge you. Yeah, Leo knows it. Political theorist, the prince. Yeah, exactly. So like we're talking 600-700 years ago, Renaissance kind of time. This word Machiavelli is his name, but it also has become an adjective where if somebody, maybe I can give you a phrase, the ends justify the means. You guys know this phrase? Fakes his death and moved to Costa Rica. That's what people say. Maybe Biggie's there with him, right? He did put out some like hologram album after he's gone, but you know, I'm not. This is like the kind of conspiracy theory that was popular before the internet, and I wonder where it's gone since then. The ends justify the means. What does that mean? You guys heard this phrase before? You've probably heard it before. Have you ever stopped to think what it is talking about? Do whatever it takes to reach your goal. Yeah, exactly. Do anything to achieve your goal, no matter good or bad. Very good. Yeah, you guys got it. So again, it's talking about success. So what is the end is the goal, right? Just like you guys are saying. Do whatever it takes to be successful. So even if that means like lying or cheating or stealing or whatever, if you get what you're looking to get, then all that other stuff doesn't matter. And so often maybe something like the mafia or some sort of criminal organization, they might try to embody these sorts of ideas. Yeah, very good. So make Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa. So what does it say? Do you guys know Mother Teresa? I'm going to hope you guys probably know her, right? Who's Mother Teresa? What does she embody? If Machiavelli is the ends justifies the means guy, Mother Teresa? Say it again. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay, so Brandon's thinking, what does Mother Teresa represent? So do no evil, she's a saint. Yeah, exactly. So she's famous for being kind and doing charitable work. She did a lot of work in India, in fact. So she's kind of an interesting person to bring up here. But yeah, she's a saint, exactly. And so to make Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa, of course, is saying that the Artha Shastra is one badass book, right? It's telling people to trick each other, backstab each other, do all sorts of crazy things to get whatever you want. It all comes down to getting what you want, right? Success. And the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you do it. Questions about success? Is that pretty clear? Winning the game, right? And we like to win the game in this country. So success is a big one for us. Here's an interesting book cover. Have you guys heard of the Kama Sutra before? Now, if you're, in a family setting, I don't recommend you Google it. It's kind of not safe for work sort of material. Maybe you can tell from the book cover. Has anybody heard of it before? Kama Sutra? I think it's famous enough that you might know this one. The other two are pretty obscure. Actually, I even erased the Dharma one. You don't have to know that. But this book you might know. Has anybody heard of this? Brendan, you heard of it? Heard the name? You know anything about it? Movies and shows, people talk about it. Yeah, exactly. So people think of it as a sex manual, right? So there are a lot of sex positions in this, and this was, of course, well before the internet. We're talking 1800 years ago, 1800 years ago. And so they were talking about sex positions in a way that was very open and very descriptive. Sometimes there are even pictures involved. And so when like missionaries first came to India and they encountered this book, they were like, they became very bashful and started blushing and stuff. And of course, translated into English very quickly. So sex manual is part of it, but it's not the only part. It's also a guide to love and family, human relationships, other aspects of pleasure in life. And so again, as we think about these categories, we're going to realize that they sort of expand or contract. They change how we might think about these ideas, right? So I think for us, a lot of the time, pleasure is pretty narrow. It's like getting really drunk or having sex or enjoying some food. It's like very sort of a very narrow category. But here it expands it quite a bit, right? It's saying a friendship could be pleasurable, right? And that might not sound so odd to some of you, but it might sound weird to some others, right? I don't necessarily always look for pleasure in my friendships. My friendships might be trying to do something. I'm trying to go find some pleasure, but the relationship itself, right, could also be pleasurable. And so that's something that this is talking about too. And yeah, that's basically it. Any questions on these three aims of life? That mostly covers them. How we do it. Sometimes there's also a fourth aim, which we'll actually talk about more later on, but it's in the background, right? It was in the reading, this idea of liberation, but we'll come back to that another time. Questions about these? Duty, success, pleasure. Do you feel like you understand them pretty well? Ooh. All right, why don't I turn it over to you? We've got a half hour left. So let's talk about some stuff. I made a Google Doc for you. And I'm going to send you the link. And what I want you to do is think about these three categories. Again, it's going to be a little bit loose. You might be a little confused what's going on here. But we've got these three aims of life: duty, success, pleasure. And basically for these different parts of life: happiness, marriage, eating, career, sports, health, faith, depression, I want you to rank the three aims of life as which one is more important, right? Which one? So for example, if I want to be happy, is duty more important? Should I do my duty? Should I pursue success? Or should I focus on pleasure, right? If I want to be happy in life, which of those three is more important? Does that make sense? So hopefully you can all access this Google Doc. If you download it, you can edit it. If you don't want to download it, you just want to copy and paste, you can, I think that was all of them. Yeah, you can copy and paste what I just sent you. I'll leave it up to you. And I want you to go through and just rank the three aims of life. And then I'm going to put you into breakout rooms and ask you to talk about why, or the different choices you made. So any questions right now? Again, the three aims are duty, success, and pleasure. Put that here. So that's what I'm asking you to do. Is that clear? Do you guys have any questions for me? Okay, we're back. How were your conversations? Did you guys find any topics particularly interesting or challenging or confusing, illuminating? What did you guys come up with? Who wants to share? Nobody's sharing? Come on, the last class was sharing like very excitedly. Why don't you guys want to share? So Brendan and I talked about eating. Anybody else talk about eating? Dr. Bill should share. I was a little confused about sports. Okay, let's talk about sports. Sports, cool. Actually, one thing I noticed, there are a lot of men in this class. I think Jen's a little outnumbered today. Are we? Everybody else? Yeah. Um, Actually, Kristen, I think she was here, but she disappeared. But yeah, it was sort of an overwhelming dude vibe going on here. So please forgive us for going the dude vibe route. But I think sports are good. So Anthony, what did you put for sports? Pleasure, success, duty. Zamo's talking. Oh, are those your categories for marriage, Zamo? Yeah, marriage is a good one. Um, Here, we can do sports too, and then we'll go to marriage. Actually, it's the same. It's the same order. You guys got pleasure, success, duty. So, did anybody put anything different for sports? Did anybody put duty or success over pleasure? And again, this is just like talking about your life. You know, what is sports to you? So, I guess maybe I can just ask you, Anthony. What did you find confusing about it? What were you thinking as you made that list? That looks like a good list to me. Do you play sports for pleasure and not to necessarily win all the time? Would it put success or duty? Yeah. Is anybody making you play? Like, for example, who's like, I don't know, Tiger Woods' kid is playing golf now or something like that, right? That could be sort of like a duty thing where the parents are making the kid play the sport. That happens sometimes. Yeah, they could go either way. And so it really comes down to you. One thing Brendan and I talked about was success versus pleasure, right? You could imagine like a Michael Phelps kind of person who would definitely put success or maybe even duty up at the top. It's become like his job and his obligation to play or to swim successfully, right? And you got to think pleasure is not high on his list when he's thinking about why he swims and why he participates in the way he does. Can vary from person to person. Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to context, right? And so Brandon and I were also talking. I play ultimate frisbee, and back in the day, you know, like a good 15 years ago or something, I was playing more competitive ultimate frisbee. And then I realized life is too short to be playing competitive ultimate frisbee, right? I just sort of played in the beer league as they call it, and you know, I still played a lot. I still love to play. It's one of the things I miss the most about this pandemic life is I don't get to play. I guess now that I'm getting vaccinated, maybe I can this spring. um, but yeah, frisbee is one of my favorite things, and a lot of it comes down to the pleasure of it. I still want to win. I want to play well. You know, I want to win the game. But at the end of the day, to do it for anything other than pleasure, I think, for my life at least, would be a mistake. But as Eric's saying, yeah, it all comes down to context, right? A lot of these things come down to context. Okay, Zamo brought up marriage. Why don't we do marriage? Because that'll kind of balance out the bro vibe that we were just doing. Ultimate Frisbee is that it's popular among scientists. Yeah, Bill Nye the Science Guy. He plays Ultimate Frisbee, or at least he used to. It's actually pretty good for, you know, when you become old, right? I feel like basketball, you got to jump, you got to play defense, you know, you lose your hops as you get old. But frisbee, I can still throw a frisbee with the best of them. I can't run very fast, but I can still throw it. What about marriage? So Zamo put pleasure number one. Did anybody put anything else? You guys agree pleasure number one for marriage? Ooh, Kevin says duty. Actually, you know what this reminds me of is when we talked about Tevye the dairyman. You guys remember that? I was trying to convince you guys that marrying for food and financial success is not the worst thing in the world. Dell says duty. Kevin says duty. Who wants to talk about duty? What? Yeah. What? So Zamo says, "Hey, it's not your job." Who wants to say? Who wants to explain why duty is important in marriage? Because I agree. I think that is definitely one thing to think about. What's the role of duty in marriage? For some people, it can be. So Tevye the dairyman, I can give you an example, right? Remember, Tevye goes to visit the rich butcher. They have a conversation. Tevye says, "Hey, I'm gonna have my daughter marry you because she'll be comfortable," right? And we could say that was success, was at the top for that one. But when he goes to approach the daughter, why would she marry the rich butcher? Not because she wants to, definitely not pleasure, maybe for success, but I think mostly for duty. How is it duty? Because her dad is making her, right? Her dad says, marry this guy, and so she has to do it. Arranged marriage. Have you guys heard of arranged marriage? Arranged marriage is all about duty. In Asia, they say to keep the blood of the family. So again, parents get a say, right? Maybe you guys have heard the phrase. This is in line with what Tana's saying, but you don't just marry a person; you marry a family. You guys heard that before? And in fact, in a lot of societies, there are whole, yeah, exactly. There are whole, let's say, considerations involved, right? You got to pay a dowry. Sometimes there's a question, is the girl going to join the man's house? Is the man going to join the woman's house, right? And so there are many familial questions. I know we live in an age where a lot of people marry for love, but really across the board, a lot of societies, a lot of, we could say, traditions built around marriage that have to do with duty. And we'll see that in this book, right? So these three things we're gonna talk about it a lot. It's gonna show up a lot. We'll see some more examples of this too. It's too expensive. Very good. Leaving New York, sacrifice for marriage. Okay, yeah. Well, Zamo gave a cryptic line about finding the woman of his dreams earlier. So I am sort of curious about that, but I don't want to pry. Let's find another list. Somebody said one. Yeah, Kevin said depression question mark. What do you guys think of that one? Depression question mark. So that one's a little bit of an odd one. Zama's gonna pick me up this weekend. We're gonna go for a ride in a sports car. He's gonna tell me his life story. So all of these other ones are things you might pursue, right? You want happiness, you want marriage, career, sports. All those are kind of good. Depression is something you don't want, right? And so now we have to kind of flip it on its head and think, which one of these three, duty, success, pleasure, is most important when it comes to depression, right? So you could think about it two ways. Like, what do we need to do better in order to not be depressed? Or what are we doing wrong? Which factor is causing problems for us and leading to depression? College making you depressed, Kevin? Well, this class, we're trying to help you get some tools to work your way out of depression. No, you gotta get a therapist for that. But I do think these things that we call depression has a lot to do with these three things: duty, success, and pleasure. And I do think talking about them, understanding them, kind of peeling them apart. Again, if you think about happiness, for example, if we think happiness can only come when we achieve something, right? I will only be happy when I get an A in that class. We have basically two options: is to work really hard and grind super hard and then sort of ruin our lives and have no pleasure. Or the other option is to just not try and say, I didn't even try. I don't even care. You guys ever had that experience before? I feel like that describes most of my students, right? And so then when you fail, you're not even concerned about it, right? And so these are basically your only choices. But I think if we peel these apart and we see success is separate from pleasure, success is separate from duty, and we can kind of decide how these things come together in our lives, I think there's actually a lot of power behind it. So hopefully, you can take away something from this class. Obviously, I'm not here to be your therapist or anything like that, but I hope to give you some tools to think about it at least. Okay, what about happiness? What's the most important one for happiness? They're sort of shadows of each other, right? If happiness is bright, depression would be dark. So how do we become happy, guys? What do we got to do? We got to win the game. We got to do what we're told. We got to eat some delicious, pleasurable things. What's the key to happiness? We're asking the real questions here. Back in high school, I had a friend that gave up his love life just to get valedictorian of high school. Yeah. So from this perspective, what he did is he put his success and maybe duty, depending on what his parents had to say, over pleasure, right? Finding your goals, aim, and achieving it. That's how you. So Eric is saying how to be happy is you define your goals and you aim and achieve it. Is that what you're saying, Eric? So in a way, if we think about goals, that would be success, right? So if we think happiness is goal oriented, then happiness comes from succeeding in life. And again, I think this is a big part of how we think about society, right? Is happiness comes from success. It could come from pleasure, right? You do a pleasurable thing, you get some sort of happiness. Brendan and I were talking about this too. And it's a hard question, right? What about duty? Does duty give people happiness? That one probably is not a popular one for people. Duty, happiness? Maybe not. So one last thing, we got 2 minutes left. One last thing to keep in mind is sometimes these things come into conflict, and Kevin's story is a perfect example. This is something you guys have to deal with, right? Is you got to think, my time is limited. Am I going to do all my homework and use all my time to read this story? And of course, the answer is yes, but you won't have to read too much. Or am I going to hang out with my friends and do whatever you like to do, play some games, have some fun, sleep more, right? These are choices we got to make. And so sometimes these come in conflict. And just like the caste system, where we talked about how certain castes are higher than others, there's a hierarchy here too, where duty is above pleasure, is above success. And so if you think about Kevin's friend's story, it actually lines up pretty nicely, right? By putting your personal pleasure at the bottom, you can go out and achieve what you're looking for. And whether you live in sort of a traditional way or a modern way, whether you're religious or not religious, I think some version of this is probably in the back of your head somewhere. There's always this tension where it's like, should I do what I'm supposed to do, or should I do what's sort of comfortable, what's sort of fun, right? And of course, from this very traditional background, this cultural context that we're talking about here, duty is number one, success is number two, and pleasure is at the bottom. So we're out of time now. We can pick up with more stories about these coming into conflict next time. We've got a story of a king who puts his duty over the other ones to the point that he neglects them and he gets into trouble for it. So more to come, but yeah, good conversation today. I know it's kind of crappy weather outside, so